Hello once again, everybody. As you probably recall from the last video, we're going to be talking about the Eldar today. Now, you might also recall that I didn't promise that I would be the one talking about the Eldar. You see, I don't really know too much about them. I don't know about their model history, I don't know about their lore. I'm just getting into them, to be honest with you. It's not that they got bad models or have terrible lore or anything. It's just that their lore and their models are so generally antithetical to my orky preferences that I never really cared about them much until recently. But seeing as I have an Eldar artifact that I want to paint in my possession, I figured I'd enlist the help of a dear friend of mine from college and beyond. Some of you will recognize him from Gnome Hut and Goblin Hovel. Some of you will recognize him as an accomplished published author, an editor. Some of you will recognize him as your admissions counselor, and others will recognize him as a respected member of the Austin Wargaming Community. So, I'm going to shut up and let Vyasar Ganesan tell you guys a little bit about the Eldar.
Hi everyone, this is Vyasar. Derek asked me to contribute some things to his little production here, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Eldar today. So we're going to go all the way back to the early 90s, back when Derek and I were still in diapers. The Eldar really started out and were first introduced in Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader, which was a small skirmish type game setting. It's funny because it was actually a single Dark Elf space trooper who was the very, very first Eldar that was made. Back in those days, you know, every single Eldar that they made was its own individual character. We're talking about people like Male Nightwing or Katra Darkflight, or everyone's got a fun adjective as their last name. Very exciting, very different type of world that we're talking about. Everyone's weapons looked pretty bizarre and space piratey. Everyone had fun, cool helmets that they got to wear. There were elf champions that started coming out in the late 80s. Really, like the Rogue Trader Space Elves themselves really start showing up in 87, but you know, they don't really see major play or wide distribution because at this point because, you know, around 1990, there were only 10 actual Games Workshop stores in the US. But as we approach second edition, we start seeing this rise in popularity pay off. People want to see the craft worlds explored. People want to see the different Exarchs and Phoenix Lords being brought up and developed. People want their own favorite stories and lore and models brought to the fore. So second edition rolls around, and now you've got heavy whip and grav platforms. You've got the warp spiders. You've got, instead of bizarre pirate names, you've got the Phoenix Lords like Asurmen and Mogin Ra and Fuegon and Baharath. James Zar's first model hits the field. You've got Farseer Eldrad Ulthron of Ulthwé appear in his very first model, which is funny because it actually doesn't change that much between his very first model and his most recent model, too. Around this time as well, you start seeing the introduction of the very first Warlocks. Warlocks were a really interesting part of the Eldar universe or Eldar fandom because they start out as aspect warriors, as just sort of Eldar going around this martial path, and then take a brief detour to become psychics, to become wizards, to become whatever you want to call it, and then they go right back to the front lines as these sort of generals that can beat the crap out of you with their massive swords and also blast you to hell with their psychic rune casting powers. Warlocks are really fascinating. I think they epitomize some of the most beautiful aspects of the Eldar world, their craftsmanship, their attention to detail, flowing robes, and also some of the saddest parts of the Eldar. You know, we consider the Eldar to be one of the good aligned factions, but they've fallen from grace in a big, big way, and many can interpret the Warlocks turning the spiritual into warlike matters, converting the psychic might of the Eldar into battlefield might as a part of what contributes to their fall, their warlike, aggressive nature. My challenge to Derek, actually, as part of making this video, is going to be to see if he can capture that aggression in his painting, if he can pick a craft world or an Eldar culture that has a scheme that really matches that sense of aggression and vitality that comes with the Warlock. So second edition starts branching out the Eldar, starts exploring more of the options, starts diving deeper into who they are as a people and the lore. And then 3rd edition comes around, where we get his specific Warlock model.
Alright, Vyasar, challenge accepted. So, I've decided. We're going to be painting this Warlock in a variation on the Alitok color scheme. Why? Well, you wanted aggression and vitality? They may not be as aggressive as, say, Simhan, or as vital as Biltan, but they remember their fall. They remember their history. They stick by their traditions. They want to avoid the mistakes of the past and push forward. Ideally, that sounds like what you're looking for. Color-wise, they're blue and gold. So, hey, V, you and I being Allegheny alums, blue and gold, that's our blood, I guess. So this is a kind of a mixture of lore tribute to your challenge and color tribute to our history.
Okay, so let's get started on this thing. Of course, we got to lay down a nice dark blue undercoat over the black. Now, that's done for a variety of reasons. This is a nice kind of root color that makes a nice fabric tone when it's dry brushed up, but it also is that deep, dark color that avoids getting too pastel later on in the process. So the next step, of course, is to get in there with the gold. I'm going to layer down an ordinary copper tone. None of that Necron stuff that you guys saw earlier, because this time I actually want the metal to gleam. I actually want it to sparkle. I actually want it to look highlit. This is supposed to be an Eldar, a scholar, and a warrior, a mix of both. So I don't want anything dirty on this model whatsoever. I'm going to lay down thick layers on top of the helmet because that's a pretty widespread part. Not a lot of detail there. But once I get onto the rune armor and the breastplate, that requires a bit more careful line highlighting. Especially over the part where I took a little bit off the priming there too. It was a little silver. Well, now it's a little gold, and that'll just help it shine all the more should this paint stick, which I hope it does. Jesus. Now, because the detail is so raised, I have no trouble just giving it a quick dry brush there to ensure that it remains detailed, clean, precise. I don't want you judging me for it, Sasha. I can dry brush if I want to. And that's exactly what I'm going to keep doing here. Lighter shade of blue up all along the fabric edges. Just deserves a little bit of a raised edge here. Nothing too fancy just yet. Just makes the fabric pop a little. Even adds a little bit of the aesthetic too with those little errant brush strokes. Now for the really fun part. We'll try watered down line highlights on this. Yeah, that sort of looks cool, doesn't it? Once I get all these raised areas, it'll look fantastic, right? I gotta be honest, I'm not feeling confident about this. Oh man, that's looking way too light. That almost throws a whole wrench into the gradient, and I'm losing a lot of aesthetic this way. But I gotta try, right? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Persist? Keep going? Ever onwards? Excelsior?
It was at this moment Derek realized
he had fucked up.
Huck shit, cock, dick, cunt, tit, fuck, piss, balls, ass, pecker, queef, oh shit, fuck, bitch, damn fucking diarrhea, slut with...
Okay, well that was probably the worst idea I could have had for this. Seriously, what was I thinking? That line highlighting was a bit too much. Let's take that gradient back down and just dry brush up from there with that same lighter shade. There, now doesn't that look a lot better? God. If I ever get ideas above my station again, I'm gonna slap myself. Speaking of dry brushing, I think it's time we went in and burnished a little bit of that gold. See how much more it's shining now that I gave it a quick dry brush over the copper tones? That is exactly what I was hoping for. Is that royal gold, that red gold that helps shine through, cut through and contrast with the blue. But now it's time for some detail work, like the red in these eye lenses. Come on, get in them. I'm gonna have to clean that up later. Let's try the other one. Not quite good enough. I'll clean that up in a bit. It's exactly details like this that make these models worth the challenge. Those eyes that took a lot to re-clean up and then hand highlight around, that's what makes the Eldar so frustrating a lot of the times. Yeah, you get a lot of times like this where it's a wide area to base coat with a lot of shiny, easy materials to work with, but all the details that are to follow, that's what really separates the Eldar from the Monkai, I guess. Now you can judge me all you want, Sasha. The base coats of this are officially done. Yeah, and she's still giving me that disapproving look. Yeah, so once the details are base coated, it's time for the dry brush again. All those brown leather bits like the strings, the bags, the pouches and all, I'm going to dry brush that with the same kind of bone color that I painted the shuriken pistol. Maybe a little darker than that. I'll reserve some for the hand highlighting projects later, but I gotta take the little victories and dry brush where I can. Because at the end of the day, after I finish dry brushing all this, I'm still going to have to go back onto the leather portions like the bag and the belt, and highlight the flaps and the pouches with that very same light color of leather. See right there? Makes all the difference in the world in my opinion, and I'm going to do this with every pouch opening, with every edge on those belts. The challenge therein is to not get any of that highlighting material onto that lovely blue of the coat and the coat tails, at least not before it's time. I don't want this to look dirty in the least, so I've got to avoid that if I can. And the next order of business, of course, will be to base coat and highlight these gems on the pommel of the sword, on the sides of the helmet, on the breastplate, on those little charms around his waist, everywhere. The dark red will lay the foundation, and there's a technique that I remember using before on one of my previous Warlocks that I will attempt to use again here, once I can remember it, of course. Hey, one step at a time. Let's just make sure this red doesn't get on any of the gold, huh? Now what I've got to do is highlight the edges of the shuriken pistol, just a little bit lighter bone shade. Yeah, I take wraith bone as a material very seriously, so I colored it like, well, dried and desiccated bone. That highlight is just the clean bone shade. Now I'm going to highlight the glyphs on the pouch with a bright gold as well. Now the camera can't really see this all that well, but you looking at the model later will be able to see the reflective surfaces perfectly. I think it looks cool. Judge me all you want. So now it's the hardest part, just getting into the middle of those lenses and highlighting them a lighter shade of red. Just finest brush I have. Ultimate level of detail. Impossible. I got it. Okay, now it's time for more easy stuff. Inking. I'm taking some light flesh ink and I'm running it around the crevices at the back of the helmet and in the armor. Although I still think that looks a bit too light for the detail I'm going for. So why not try something more like this red shade? Yeah, that'll really darken up the gold. Nothing fancy, just doing the same thing that I was with the flesh shade, in all the same places. The crevices around the helmets, the area underneath and around the gems, the sword pommel, the breastplate, everything that just kind of needs a slight shade. Even that symbol on the pouch needs it just a little bit to help it stick a little bit. Get that area around the gem, because that is an essential part of glossing and highlighting that stone in the middle of his chest piece. This is what I'm talking about right here. You see how I did the gems on this Warlock? I want to try and reproduce that on this current Warlock. To do that, I'm going to need the finest brush I have and the lightest shade of red I have for the initial highlights. It'll actually get darker towards the middle before getting super bright at pinpoints on top of each of the gems. Hopefully I can get them all to match up to mimic a natural light shining down on him. but I'm still learning. I haven't got the artist's eye quite yet. But I think that you'll find, even with the camera being the way it is, these gems are starting to look like there's more at work here than just my painting's room lamp. Alrighty, so now it's going to be time to brush up on that sword. I'm once more not going to be doing the Necron thing of making it look dirty. I'm actually going to be taking some purple ink and making the sword look a bit, mystical, you could say. And speaking of mystical, since I don't like the way the decals look for the Eldar Craft World symbols, I have to hand paint on this Halitok symbol on his thigh. Now, judge me all you want, I'm not an artist. I just like doing some of these designs because the alternatives are much worse. And there we're going to have a little bit of that silver highlight on that purple silver blade, making all the details at the top really stick out, and also making it look shinier, like the mystical elven weapon it is. So by the time I wrap this up, it'll be shiny and full and dynamic, imperious to say the least. With a few bits of added detail and highlighting, I've transformed a blank canvas into probably the exact same thing Vyasar was looking for. Aggressive, vital, vigorous, scholarly.
So there you have it, my attempt at painting a historic Eldar model. I can see why, as Vyasar says, 3rd edition really meant a lot for these guys. This is when people actually started to really develop interest in them as a faction. And like I said, after painting this, I can see why. The models look awesome, the lore is pretty cool, and let me tell you, this model was a challenge. I'm not talking bad challenge. I'm talking like you desperately want to get one of these under your belt, just for the sheer amount of fun you can have making this look good. I know I griped and groaned about it, but in all honesty, I think that this was one of the more enjoyable types of models to paint, and I look forward to painting more like it in the future. So thank you to Vyasar for giving me the information and the lore behind everything of this Warlock. I look forward to doing more like this with him and others in the future. So for right now, I'd say it's time we gave the craft worlds a small rest. We'll be moving on to something even older next time, so hopefully you guys stay tuned for that, and I'll see you then.